The technology of my time was primitive and limited. For my robots, I wanted only the strongest processing power. And so I chose the best computer there is, the human brain.
The year is 1979. Mr. Dr. Zalpractice, hidden away in a bunker in the Cayman Islands, flips a switch. As he flips the switch, a brain in a green jar bubbles and gurgles. With this, the first Brainbot was born. And that's how we got Brainbots. Within 3 years, they were mass-produced and shipped out to the everyday consumer. And if you're anything like me, you've probably found yourself wondering why such an interesting piece of tech would just suddenly be lost to the sands of time. So let's talk about Brainbots, a classic tech success story that turned into something much different. 1981 saw the release of the first Brainbot model. Short, stubby, tough, and, if you ask me, adorable, this little guy was meant to be an around-the-house helper. With 4 pneumatic fingers, he was able to grasp and manipulate objects such as trash bags, taking them to the can, and picking up things from the ground. Think of this one as like a Roomba with limbs, piloted by human synapses. Speaking of human synapses, they were kept in a green cooling fluid that was meant to keep the brain from overheating and to keep it in a docile, non-psychotic state, as the brains were prone to remembering their situation and freaking out, unless they were kept in this preservative fluid. The unit was controlled by readable and writable floppy disks that came packaged with the unit. With so many open-ended options for the little guys, they ended up performing a lot of different tasks. You could see them cutting the bushes, you could see them going to get stuff from the store. Walk speed was very slow, but they would make it to the store eventually. It would just take maybe a day or two, so not the best for that. In one very strange case, one of the robots got sent to a school in Iowa with a wig on and under a fake name. He attended school for about 2 years and then dropped out to go become a skater. Something of note is how heavy these first models were. Around 500 pounds, accounting for all the metal, tubing, and jar of human brain sitting there. And despite initial human rights protests, the models sold well and earned a considerable profit for the newly founded Zalpractice Industries, which would go on to quickly start developing the second model, filling the time in between models with an updated version of the Mark I that could cook hamburgers and hot dogs with a ketchup sprayer located in the hand unit. He came packaged with an apron and new cooking behavioral subroutines. Very fun. Brainbot Mark II made its debut in Q2 of 1983. It's essentially just a revised and updated Brainbot 1, but with some key improvements and a few federally mandated drawbacks. As throughout 1982, South Philadelphia mobsters were buying up Mark I's and reprogramming them using the floppy disks to become collection agents, thugs, brute force for the mob, and taught them to use weapons, which became a pretty big problem. And so the Mark II was designed around not letting that happen, with stubby little T-Rex arms that couldn't properly hold or fire anything. The Mark II now used alkaline batteries, requiring up to 15 to function. The box with the unit in it came with 7 batteries, so that shows you how they operate. In an attempt to build public trust and distract from the fact that it is a robot with a human brain piloting it, they sold an optional smiley sticker face that was meant to disarm the public and make them feel like they could trust the robots more. The actual efficiency of the smiley face is currently unknown. There were very few studies done on if it was effective. This did, however, lead to the unit getting another spin-off similar to the Mark I. It's the Kids unit, meant to introduce kids to Zalpractice Industries' line of Brainbots, hopefully securing future customers. So these guys had one of those toys where you turn the arrow and it lands on an animal and then it makes the noise the animal makes. It had one of those built into the chest. And there were reports that were bordering on urban legends around the time that it came out that it would turn the arrow on its own without the kid having to turn it, and it would make noises that would phonetically spell out sentences. A lot of the times it was like, help me, or run, or ah. This led to mass recalls, and these units are pretty rare now. If you find one out in the wild, get it, because it's worth a pretty penny on eBay. It took a long time to design the famous Brainbot 3. The R&D team wanted to knock it out of the park. High sales on the 1 and 2 allowed for a pretty flexible budget with far-reaching scope. By this point in time, there were competitors entering the Brainbot sphere with their own types of brain-powered robots. So Zalpractis Industries had to kick it up a notch, and in winter of 1990, they delivered. Switching from the bluish-silver all-metal casing, the units now had a classy, cool, black plastic exterior. With arms too short and stubby to properly wield weapons, the long, dexterous fingers more than made up for it by being able to grab and manipulate objects easier than ever before. The Brainbot 3 also had a rechargeable battery in the back, making things easier on everybody. Very good choice there. A pull bar around the midsection for getting the unit from point A to B in case it wasn't walking fast enough was a heavily requested feature of the past ones, and here it was, right near the tummy area. You could drag it wherever you needed to. And the big standout feature was, it played CDs. Essentially what was built into it was a fully functioning CD player. In fact, CDs were how it received its programs, taking the place of the conventional floppy disks. This came at a perfect time for the boom in CD sales and the boom in robotics buying, and it all added up into one big cataclysmic buying event where this robot sold like hotcakes. Like really, really sold. If you weren't around then, you probably can't fathom how much popularity this robot had. It was crazy. But like all good things, this popularity would not last forever. In fact, trouble was already brewing within the company at the very moment it released. And that trouble was shareholders and vampires. Shareholders and vampires. You see, shortly after its introduction, the Brainbot 3's gothic, bat-like design was unintentional, but noted by a certain subgroup of people. Well, former people. Vampires in the continental US turned out to be a huge buyer of the machines. The vampires had figured out some pretty out-of-the-box uses for the little guys. For instance, you could have one hold your curtains closed during the day, and then open them at night so you can bask in the glory of the moon. And these guys also had a pretty good sound system, so they could play The Cure, Bauhaus, Transylvanian folk songs. They could get all their music listening in from the thing holding their curtains closed. Seeing another opportunity to profit in a growing market, marketing for the robot shifted heavily towards the vampires. 3 months after the initial introduction of the robot, there was the Night Friend Edition, which was clearly meant to look a lot like Dracula, in an attempt to appeal to the vampires more. Around this time, Dr. Zalpractis became entirely convinced that the future was about selling to quote-unquote Draculas, with him reportedly saying in a private boardroom meeting,
"It has come to my attention that Draculas will be spreading across the countryside, everywhere, like a great moss. This is fact. There is nothing we can do. This cannot be stopped, so we must sell robots to them. We stand on the precipice of a new era, a world no longer governed by sunlight or simple machines. The future belongs to the creatures of the night, to the Draculas who will soon dominate our world. Draculas, we cannot fight this tide, we can only ride the wave. We are not just creating machines, we are crafting the future, a future where our creations serve the inevitable rulers of this world. So let us embrace the darkness, let us innovate, and let us sell our brilliance to those who will inherit the earth. This is the perfect marketing strategy."
After the full shift to Dracula marketing, the sales of the Brainbot 3 would go on a very steep decline, and this is for a few reasons. So, 1, if you're selling to vampires, most humans are going to be uninterested unless they really like Dracula, they're goth, or it's Halloween. These robots would only start to sell around Halloween, after being associated with the vampire subculture, and the Dracula bots becoming the most produced model of it. Most people were not interested in a robot that looks like Dracula. 2, there's not a lot of vampires. They live in big packs, and I think it's 5 to a home to a den. There's 5 to one of their dens. So you sell one to them, 5 of them have one. One of them has one, all their friends have one. It's very bad business practice for you. And 3, and the biggest thing, is that Zalpractis expected the vampires to completely consume the earth within a few months. But they spread very slowly, and not everybody they bite even turns into a vampire. And then on top of that, you have the Daemon, which came and cleared out the entire Midwest of vampires in a very quick manner. The Daemon came in and just obliterated this marketing strategy. From the early 90s to the mid 90s, sales would dwindle, pockets would dry up, cash flow would stop. And Zalpractis would exit the company in 1995 to learn the ways of the night, never to be seen or heard from again.
Everyone, I realize now that we have utterly failed. I go now to learn the ways of the dark.
Taking a sigh of relief after Zalpractis left, the R&D team would keep their noses down and keep working on the next model, finally unburdened from his Dracula marketing and design mandates. This next one was going to be the big one. In 1998, the last Brainbot from the original Brainbot company was finally revealed to the world at BrainCon. Not much is known about the Brainbot 4, as not much footage survived and no test models are known to be found. Seeing as Zalpractis Industries went bankrupt a month after its unveiling, and before it had gone into mass production. It's rumored this would have been the best of the best, with outrageous claims such as the ability to project movies using a projector in the mono eye, amongst things like a new white plastic shell mimicking the technology at the time, and bendy arms and longer limbs capable of more sophisticated actions. This thing could have probably done your taxes for you, but we'll never get to see it. Luckily, the lead designers and some of the developers went on to start their own companies and move on to greener pastures, unburdened from the Dracula mandate. So, if there's any lesson from the Brainbots, don't try to sell to Draculas. They aren't the future.